this lawsuit is about? Because there's a lot of money involved here. I've heard two figures, anywhere from $30 to $50 million in royalties.
Well, first of all, it is a sad story. That's absolutely true. Second of all, I do want to correct you, though. Although the complaint refers to Jerry Goldstein, who was Sly business and personal manager, leaving him basically penniless in early 2008, such that he was living on Social Security. Sly's gone out with his music. He's been performing. He was in Japan recently on a tour with Rufus at the Blue Note, and he's actually today performing with George Clinton for a relief fund for Haiti. So he's certainly not living in his van today. In fact, since he retained us, we were able to renegotiate certain agreements for him based upon the allegations contained in our complaint.
Now the complaint, because these are specifically royalties, and I guess which allowed Mr. Goldstein to leverage assets against what Mr. Stone actually owned, and it's been going on for quite some time, it sounds like.
Since 1989. You know, we actually represent two clients. We represent Sly Stone, and we represent Ken Roberts, who was Sly's manager back late 70s, early 80s. And he had a company that managed Sly called Majokan Inc. And basically why Mr. Roberts is involved in the case is because Mr. Goldstein and his companies, we call them the Goldstein collaborators in our complaint. But basically what they did is they usurped Mr. Roberts' corporate identity because he had a prior assignment of Sly Stone's royalties from Broadcast Music Inc., BMI, and they pretended to be Ken Roberts' Majokan Inc. by incorporating a company with the same name, but with a comma in it, and were happily not only taking the royalties in the millions of dollars, but borrowing against the royalties 20 years down the road. Which is once they figured out they could borrow against the royalties, they decided they really didn't need Sly any longer. So that was one royalty stream, which is really your back-end performance royalties, which BMI collected. The other royalties come from Warner Chappell, Warner Tamerlane, from the catalog of music that was sold by music back in the early 80s. And it was Stoneflower Productions, was Sly's publishing company, and that was sold over to MyJack. So those royalties come in, which are the upfront royalties, the sync royalties, and that sort of thing, which Warner Chappell, that's that one royalty stream. And then the final royalties are basically after the from the exploitation of the master recordings that Sly originally did with CBS and now owned by Sony Music, and with Warner Brothers did some recordings there as well.
I also read that he was sort of coerced into signing agreements and things like that during a time when he was probably not as coherent as he is now. And what kind of agreements were these?
Well, we just filed an amended complaint actually this morning to make it a little clearer, because some people have had an issue. Basically what happened, and we have an eyewitness to this actually, which is very interesting. But basically what happened in 1989 was Sly Stone had a well-known addiction, and there were warrants for his arrest on several drug charges, and he was working in New York, actually in New Jersey, producing music and keeping a very low profile, but with very, very little money, and working with the producers that had very little money. Jerry Goldstein and his then partner, Steve Topley, and then lawyer Glenn Stone, tracked Sly down, and as we allege in the complaint, we contend they gave him drugs. They gave him money to support him and his co-producer at the time. And then finally, when they knew they had him sort of hooked after a period of about 4 weeks, they insisted that he sign a personal professional management agreement with them that would allow them to take care of his financial affairs, his career, etc., for reasonable compensation. And he understood he was hiring, Jerry Goldstein and his company. It was called Stonefire, which they have a tendency to copy the names of other companies. Like Sly's company was Stoneflower, so they came up with Stonefire. Ken Roberts' company was Majokan No Comma Inc., so they incorporated Majokan Comma Inc. I mean, that's kind of their modus operandi. And they got him to sign it by misrepresenting what it was. He thought he was hiring Jerry Goldstein to be his manager, and in fact, what was in there was an employment agreement where they alleged to employ him, and he assigned all his royalties over to them for $1. Yeah, And the agreements are attached. We attach them as exhibits to the complaint. So that, and what basically happened is that Goldstein kept him back, kept his career down, kept him away, supported, give him sufficient funds to live, and while he sucked off the royalties, all the while telling Sly that there were no royalties, or very little royalties, certainly less royalties than the advances, as he called them, he was giving to Sly.
It's always, it's always a rumor in the music business that this kind of thing is fairly common among artists, especially younger artists who just start out. Is that something that you kind of agree with? It seems like it's very easy to cheat these people.
It's easy to cheat them, and I think it was easier to cheat them in the 70s and 80s, late 60s, 70s, the so-called summer of love and all that sort of thing, flower power. The bottom line was, most of these people have no concept. They have no experience, no education with money. They rely, they trust these people. And it's very common in the business. People signing documents, they have to rely on what their managers and their lawyers tell them is in the document. They're not going to sit there and read an 80-page document. And when their lawyers and their managers, such as the case here, are lying to them about what they're signing, and then later suing them and then taking their names even. It wasn't sufficient for Jerry Goldstein to take the money. He had to take the name as well. I mean, he even registered the trade name, Sly and the Family Stone, as his own.
It's absolutely unbelievable. Well, I wish you good luck. We're going to continue to follow the story, and hopefully I'll get some good news from you here in the future about it.
Prince had a highly publicised spat with Warner Brothers in the early 90s. After realising that he couldn't gain possession of his own music, he began calling himself a slave to the label, changed his name to a symbol, and condemned the major label system. In April 2014, after an 18-year stalemate, Prince forged what Billboard called a landmark deal with Warner Brothers Music, which allowed the singer to reclaim ownership of his work, whilst granting Warner Music exclusive licensing rights. Financial details weren't disclosed, but the deal was considered to be a savvy move by Prince at the time. Rolling Stone noted, the agreement is also advantageous to Prince, as he now has ownership and control over the master recordings of his Warner Brothers catalogue. So just 2 years after he finally regains control of his music, Prince is mysteriously found dead in an elevator from unknown causes without a known will, leaving behind an estate worth hundreds of millions of dollars and an ultra-lucrative vault of unreleased music that could potentially be up for grabs. A writer at Billboard comments, "For an astute artist so outspoken about his rights to the ownership of his work and likeness, Prince apparently left his business affairs in considerable disarray." And according to his sister, Tyka Nelson, even without a will, thus it could be months or even years before a coherent strategy emerges for the management of Prince's estate and his substantial intellectual property assets, the recorded music elements of which are valued in the range of $100 million, according to sources. The article continues, "Apart from the beneficiaries, the entity with the most at stake in these affairs is Warner Music Group, which released the artist's music for the first 18 years of his career, and could control much of his legendary vast archive of unreleased material, which is said to include hundreds, if not more than 1,000 songs. Based on the deal's press release, it seems likely that Prince at least verbally agreed to issue upgraded versions of his Warner Brothers era albums, and mine his vault for previously unreleased material. But I'm sure that this is all just a coincidence. For more strange coincidences surrounding the
I knew something terrible would happen at the end, not to mention the fact that Michael constantly told me, "Latoya, if I die, they're going to murder me, they're going to kill me." He would tell me that, Barbara, and that's when Michael passed. When I found out he had actually passed, I said, "No, it wasn't an accident. He was murdered."
Your brother was murdered.
I always believed that from day one. I said, I'm not going to accept anything else, Barbara. They could have told me a heart attack. They could have told me he had fallen off the ladder. And I would have said, no, it's not a heart attack. He was murdered.
WBR was especially broken when Strang took over. It was heavily reliant on legacy artists and was not breaking many new ones. When I got here, no question, market share was very low in the force, says Strang. In 2015 it was up to 5.9%. By end of 2016 we'll be in the 7s. According to Nielsen Music, WBR ranked 7th among major labels in market share for 2015, at 5.8%. Through mid-year 2016, Strang has increased that share to 8.1%, good for third place and even outpacing its sister label Atlantic, although the bump is due in part to the posthumous sales of David Bowie, whose catalogue is controlled by WBR, and especially Prince, whose greatest hits album rocketed to the top of the Billboard 200 following his death. All totals include sales from Warner Music Nashville, run autonomously by its chairman/CEO, John Esposito. Perversely, Prince and Bowie dying is the best thing that could have happened to the current Warner Brothers regime, says a source close to the situation.
And of course, when he passed away on the 21st of April last year, just at the age of 57, the world mourns such a loss. I have so many friends who are obsessed with Prince. They're not just fans. Everything about him, because it wasn't just about his music, it was his ability to tell the world, especially for people who consider themselves to be outcasts and outliers, that they could be who they wanted to be. And I've spoke to so many people over the years who felt thoroughly emancipated by his very existence.
Because I was the little sister, I was always the one going, I want to do it myself. And so he didn't like that.
Because you're a musician too.
Yeah, and so he was around the corner when I was recording my first album. And he said, he called up to the studio and said, me and Sheila E. are around the corner, we want to stop by. I said, no. And he said, well, we were right around the corner, and we can just pull in. I said, no, you can't come in here. I wanted my music to be so separate from him. I knew he could make good music, but I wanted to know if I could. And so I wouldn't let him hear anything, and I wanted nothing to do with him having to do with my music.
That strength, though, and that sense of independence that you have always had to do things on your own and manage on your own, that's led you down some pretty dark roads in your life when there was no money.
Yeah, it's not so much when it wasn't any money. Unfortunately, there's a story going around that I was a prostitute, and that's so sad. I laugh. What I don't laugh about is that my children, people think that I was, so then my children have to hear about that. I think it's funny, but I don't like it for my kids. I was never a prostitute.
Where did that come from?
I had a very good friend who was a prostitute, and that may have gotten twisted along the way there. Only for my kids, don't get me wrong. I think it's funny because I know I never was. And so I laugh, but my kids are grown now, so it's definitely a funny story. But
that's struggling, though, at the same time, because it's fair to say that you did struggle for money.
Oh yeah, for now drugs and alcohol. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
When my dad passed, I kind of lost it, and so for years, and then my mom passed a year after that. It was a very, very hard road to come back from. Praise the Lord, I'm not that person anymore. There's also a story that me and Prince were estranged. Even when I was at my really lowest, I was in rehab, and although Prince and I didn't talk for about 4 months, he was still there with money. He was paying for me to eat and kept the house going, and he was paying for my children to eat, and so he was there. Financially we did not talk though for about those 4 months, but after that, uphill, I got successfully through the drug and alcohol program, and we talked ever since after that. Last 4 years of his life I worked for him, so